Well, my father was first and foremost a poet, and he had made his reputation in the world of letters as a poet before he ever wrote his first novel, Deliverance. He had been a poetry consultant at the Library of Congress. He'd won the National Book Award. He'd had lots of books, lots of honors attached to that poetry. But he'd been thinking about writing Deliverance for several years, and he finally did it. It launched him to a whole different level of fame, and he was attracting a whole lot of attention that he'd never attracted before, and he attracted the attention of Hollywood, too.
What the hell you want to go fuck around with that river for? Because it's there.
I got involved because when the novel by James Dickey, before it came out, it was in galleys, and there was a young guy working at Warner Brothers who was his former student, and he had read it in galleys and suggested it to Warner's and to me. And as soon as I read the book, I responded to the themes, perhaps in a slightly different way to James Dickey. I think Dickey belonged to that particularly southern theme of the sort of survivalist, you know, the man in the American outback tradition of being able to survive in the woods. But for me, the idea that this river, this beautiful river, was going to be dammed and destroyed was a fantastic kind of symbol about man's attempt to conquer nature. These four men were urban men, so they wanted to reestablish their connection and commune with nature.
They're all based on my father, but there are people who he always related to the individual characters in the book.
Machines are gonna fail, and the system's gonna fail.
And then what?
Then survival. Who has the ability to survive?
Certainly, Lewis Medlock is drawn from one of my father's closest friends, who's still alive, still lives in Atlanta, and who was fascinated by the idea of survival.
And you can't wait for it to happen, can you? You can't wait for it. Well, the system's done all right by me.
Ed is pretty much based on my father and his experiences. Ed is in the advertising business, basically. So is my father. In the book, there are several scenes that are very much out of our family life and his experience with my mother. And the characters of Bobby and Drew, both to a certain extent, draw on a man who was another person very close to my father. And these three of them were the team or the group of friends that would typically go up into the mountains and go canoeing together.
He had written a screenplay, and then he and I then worked together on that over a period of time. And he was a brilliant correspondent. He was a wonderful letter writer, and he would write me his notes about the script, and I'd respond. And so that's how we functioned, really. So I went to John Calley and Ted Ashley, who were running Warner's, and they said, go off and make it with unknowns. So I went around America looking at all the regional theater, and I indeed found Ronnie Cox and Ned Beatty, and neither of them had been in a film or done television or anything.
It was my first film. Not only my first film, my first time in front of a camera. And I was actually the first of the four actors that John Boorman found. He came to New York looking for good unknown actors, and God knows I was unknown. Luckily, I had already read the novel, so I was a bit ahead of the game in that respect.
I'm working in this repertory type theater in Washington, D.C. They were casting in Los Angeles and New York. And the word that got out is they were looking for fairly young actors, mostly around the age of 30, from the South, who had a lot of theater training. And the joke was, the answer was, well, there's three of them. Which one would you like to see first? Because there weren't a lot of actors doing classics and such that were jumping up from the southern part of the United States during that period. And so I laughingly went to New York to see whether anything would come of it. And that's the first time I met Mr. Boorman.
And I came back and met with John. He liked me. So once they started making the final decisions, they kept telling me and Ned that you know, that we were in, but they were waiting for the other two guys.
Listen, Lewis, let's go back to town and play golf.
I asked John Voight, and I had an enormous problem trying to persuade him.
When I first read the film, I was a little bit concerned about it. I didn't know whether I wanted to do it. I hit that sodomy scene, and pushed me back a little bit. I didn't know what it was all about. You know, it was a little bit more like a horror film than the films that I was as interested in doing. And then I came to this scene where he climbs the cliff, and there was just the response to the waterfall and the moon, and he says,
Christ, what have you?
and all the complications of that, going up to he knows not where with a weapon to possibly kill a man who's trying to kill him, and all the nightmare of it that he's seen, I said, I can do that. I can see my face doing that. And still, I didn't know.
At one point, talking endlessly on the phone, I said, John, look, I said, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and you either say yes or no, and then I'm going to put the phone down. I'm timing it now, yes or no. All you've got to say is you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. And it's John saying, but John, it's completely arbitrary. Why 30 seconds? You know, at least make it 2 minutes. I said, no, it's 30 seconds.
It was a crazy conversation anyway.
Yes or no, John? No, I can't decide like that. It's ridiculous. I put the phone down. 10 minutes later, he phoned back. He said, I'll do it.
I liked John from the minute I met him, and I still am impressed with his charisma. He's smart. He's a great filmmaker.
I've never been insured in my life. I don't believe in insurance.
The other character, I like the idea of Burt Reynolds.
There's no risk.
And the studio, they weren't too happy about that either, really, because he'd been in 3 TV series which all failed.
Yes, bad television and bad movies. So it was a big change.
But we got him, and they finally agreed.
Sometimes you have to lose yourself before you can find anything.
And now being a Southerner, raised in Georgia and Florida, I knew Dickie's work, and I got this call, would I fly to LA and meet with Borman? And I said, of course. And I came out and went to the back lot at Warner Brothers, and we started immediately talking and laughing, and he said, can you do a Southern accent? And I said, I've spent 20 years trying to get rid of it, but yes, I can.
I want to get some drivers to drive this car and that car down to Aintree. Drivers, you understand?
And then he said, would you mind improvising? And I thought he meant with him, and I said, no, I love to improvise. And he opened the door, and Voight came out through the secret door, came John Voight, who I immediately liked, because John is guileless and just a wonderful guy.
I think Burt saw this as what he knew it would be, which was it was going to propel him into the public eye. And when he came on the set, he knew that. He knew what this picture could do, and he knew how to play that role. So he was looking at me to see if I was going to interfere with that. So he's looking at me like, are you my friend? Are you my enemy?
I would sit in his chair, I would sit in his chair a lot. Just wanted to see what he'd say, because he was so sweet. And 3 or 4 weeks went by, and he didn't say anything. So finally I said, don't you want to know why I'm sitting in your chair? And he said, I was wondering. And I said, well, I can't sit in my chair because I'd cover up my name. And he went, oh. I mean, that's how guileless he is. I mean, I could pull 1,000 practical jokes on him, which I did all the time.
We knew each other from the beginning, and we laughed a lot from the beginning. So there was always that ingredient. And John has a great sense of humor, a terrific sense of humor. So he was the proper master for us to be dealing with at that time.
We were rehearsing in this sort of country club in Clayton, Georgia, because the actors had to train in canoe and archery and get fit. And we had, it was a lot of work to do to get them into a state where they'd be able to safely make this picture.
And we had 2 weeks of rehearsal where we all just sort of were together. And we got together every day, all day.
But we would sit for hours and we'd talk about our relationship, but then we'd talk about, did our parents know each other? And how did we get to be friends? And we wrote a novel. John did anyway, and I tried to help.
And so Jim came up and sat in the bar, and he had this booming voice and this powerful presence, and he was very intimidating.
And Dickie always called us by our character names. And he went, "Lewis, I'm talking to you, boy. Come over here." And the girl said, "I think Mr. Dickie wants you." And I said, "He ain't talking to me. My name ain't Lewis. My name is Burton. Tomorrow morning, I'll be Lewis." And then he got up. And I could feel him coming, across. And I was sitting in a bar stool. Now, a bar stool was pretty tall. And he was so big that he stood up over me, and his hands down like this on the bar, and his head was still here. And he went, "Now, Lewis, I was talking to you, boy. I asked you to come over there. I want to talk to you." I said, "Mr. Dickie, I'm not Lewis. I'm Bert now. Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, I'll be Lewis. But now, get out of my goddamn face." And there was a quiet little moment there where I thought, possibly he will kill me, or cut me, or stab me, or whatever. And he went, "That's exactly what Lewis would have said." And then he went back over and drove them crazy for the rest of the evening. Never bothered me again.
I was trying to include him in this thing, so I invited him to rehearsals, but he would sit there and then he'd make these kind of noises of alarm when he'd hear, the lines being spoken. He would go, "Ah, ah, ah." And it was impossible to work.
Well, I don't think Jim Dickie had ever seen actors working out before. He's a poet. He never called me Ronnie. He only called me Drew. So he'd come in the afternoon, where they're working, and he would say, "Hey, Drew, come over here. Do that scene for these guys."
He also told each one of us, separate from the other ones, it really happened. I beg your pardon? It really happened.
He told me privately and made me swear never to tell another living soul, was that he said everything in that book happened to me. And I was absolutely stunned to hear this.
And I then said to John Voight one night, "It really happened. Dickie told me." And Voight said, "Yeah, he told me too." I said, "He did?" And then we found out he told Ned, and he told Ronnie.
Oh, my father loved to make up stories, and he loved to play with people's minds, and he thought this was a way of getting these guys revved up. And my father saw Deliverance as his movie. He was very possessive. I think lots of writers feel that way, and he certainly felt that way. And my father had a really powerful personality, and initially he wanted to be on the set, and he wanted to be engaged and involved with the actors, and he wanted essentially to be a parallel director of the movie. And eventually, in fact, quite quickly, the actors got uncomfortable with it because they were dealing with John, who understood actors very well, and then they were trying to deal with my father, who was trying to project his persona into each of the characters.
So finally I said to him, "Well, look, Jim, you're going to have to leave because we've got to get on with this and make the film, and we've got to rehearse, and you just got to leave it in my hands." So he wasn't too happy about that, but he had no choice. So he did say, he said, "I want to say goodbye to the boys." So I said, "Okay."
And I'll never forget, he went to the door. We were rehearsing in this house, and he went to the door and he said, "I understand that my presence would be more expeditious by my absence."
And then he turned on his heel and he left. And Bert said to me, "Does that mean he's going or he's staying?" And it was a great moment.
You all about ready to leave?
Yeah.
Because Dickie was so intimidating and I had to ask him to leave, I said, you know, I want you to go and I want you to come back and play the sheriff. And he said, if I go, I ain't coming back. Get yourself another boy. Anyway, he couldn't resist and he came back and we shot the scene.
Mr. Queen's got a brother-in-law back up in there somewhere. He took off hunting a couple of 3 days ago and nobody's heard from him since.
It was fascinating in a sense that the actors who had been so intimidated by him, now at the end of the film, they came back face to face with him. Of course, on their own ground, because they were actors and he wasn't, so they were in a much more superior position.
Well, he was a good actor, actually. Very good actor. You know, he did a lot of the readings of his own poetry, and he was very popular because he had a great sense of drama.
I'd kind of like to see this town die peaceful.
As a director, you have to deal with actors individually in terms of what their needs are. And here you had 3 different approaches. You had the theatrical approach of Ned Beatty and Ronnie Cox. You had your Hollywood, film star like Burt Reynolds, and Voight, who's a method actor. And so there was a very nice dynamic there.
I have to say that I think that the casting was, as it always is, a great part of the success of that film. And the good thing about us all is that we all rolled up our sleeves and we wanted to do the job.
It's all set, Drew. This river cruise gonna happen or not? Just getting your car, huh?
And we all contributed whatever we had to it.
This is the last chance we got to see this river. You just wait till you feel that white water under you, Bobby. Ain't that right?
I don't know
Tell
if
me
I'm
about
ready.
that.
Much about it, Lisbeth. I'm willing to